Hi everyone, welcome. And today's show, we're going to be looking at a tool or framework called Piral that will allow you to kind of break off your monoliths. And it's all presented by my buddy Florian Rappel in this episode of Geekfest. So do stay tuned. Hi, folks. Welcome again to the show. And this is the place where we kind of interview interesting people with their interesting projects. And today we've got Florian Rappel, a good old friend of mine, joining us again. This is kind of a take two on the Piral video we made ages ago on YouTube. How are you doing, sir?
Fine. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you so much. It's been ages. It's been past the pandemic. We've survived COVID in a sense. We both have kids. Come on. And we both are hoping for a next in-person event. Are there any kind of events you are kind of planning to attend?
There are a couple of conferences coming up. I think one of the conferences I'm looking the most forward is Cloud Brew in Belgium. So this will be a great event, I think.
Yeah, maybe I'll check you on the flip side there on Cloud Brew. I've actually submitted a CFP, so please, Martin Blau, if you can accept me. This is not a shout out to him, but hey, the show is not about Cloud Brew. The show is about the project called Piral that you've been developing. Maybe give us some a quick introduction about yourself, and then we can hone into the project Piral.
Sure. So my name, as you said, is Florian Rappel. I'm a solution architect based in Munich, Germany. I'm specialized in distributed web applications, doing that for the last, I think, 10 years somewhat. And I'm a MVP in the area of development technologies. These days, I'm only exclusively focused on distributed web applications using technologies such as Node.js with TypeScript, React, Angular, Vue, all the major frameworks that are out there, and maybe some newcomers too. And my job usually is to make sure that teams can scale well, that large-scale web applications can be written. And for this, I'm usually advocating a lot the microfrontend architecture.
Yeah, I mean the whole buzzword of microservices, we all know, right? And typically people say microservices, containers, blah, 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 right? And it all ends up in a big monolith called the UI anyway. So as I understand, this Piral project that you were talking about is the kind of taking that step further to actually break it down even more.
Correctly. So what microfrontends allow you is to actually break up the monolith, as you said, have different teams working on different areas of your application. Imagine, I don't know, an e-commerce application where there is one team responsible for product view and there's another team responsible for all the checkout experience and showing, for instance, the card on that screen, etc., etc. So you can go ahead and break down your application in all the different subdomains and then give these domains to dedicated teams, which of course then scales really well. The promise of that is, of course, that these teams don't need to align. They don't work in one code base, but rather, have their own code base, their own processes. They can decide when they ship an update, when they add something new, when they remove something. And of course, the challenge there is to orchestrate all that. The same thing, of course, is microservices on the backend. And to make that really simple for developers, we've created a framework called Piral that really has this whole thing figured out from beginning to the end.
I'm just throwing up the Piral URL there, piral.io, for the folks that want to go check it out. But you're not here to just talk, right? You are here to also give us some demos. And I've got a special hat showing what we have going on today. So I believe you've got something prepared. I'm just going to throw it on the screen there. Maybe that. There we go. And then get rid of that banner. And then Spiral, right? Take it away.
Yeah, that's the website we have, right? It has, let's say, all the buzzwords in there that you would expect, draw the attention. But of course, it also leads to the documentation side. So if you're, let's say, interested in really diving in there, I can only recommend going through our tutorials. You can also watch videos there. So at least the first, I don't know, 12 to 15 tutorials, they all have a video. Then it gets really specialized into some special areas. You might not need all of that information, but that's where the choosing part comes in. So you choose how deep you want to get into that framework or what you're really after. So what Piral gives you in a nutshell, and just to illustrate that here, for instance, on one of our demo applications, so we have a lot of them online, also in very specialized areas. Here you see, for instance, kind of a Netflix clone that was done so well that even Google thinks that this is a site to I don't know, hijack you, but there are no credentials or anything needed to use that site. So it's really just a mock. It gets the data from IMDb, and there is no Netflix account or similar required. But all the parts that are in there in this application, I mean, it's quite fast, right? It loads. The loading time is really just, getting that data. That's all very, as you would expect from Netflix or a video streaming site. So you can go here and you can mark your favorites, right? Can see, oh, She-Hulk, is that good? I don't know. Let's add it to my favorites. And when you go, for instance, to this favorite subpage, I mean, all the things that I've added, for instance, Stranger Things here that I added in the past, they already appear here. But you wouldn't guess it. All these things that are coming together here, they're all written in different microfrontends. And there are various areas where you could see that. So one thing that I can show you here is that's kind of, let's say, the backend of the site where all these microfrontends are managed. So if you would upload a microfrontend, if you would create a new one, they would all appear here in this list. But this is kind of a powerful thing because it allows you now to actually say what should be delivered to the front end, where it then gets dynamically composed. So for instance, as just, a reminder that this favorite thing is a microfrontend, I could just disable it. Now, caution here, this disables favorites now for every user. So it's not just now for me, it's really also if you would use the site right now, it would also disappear. So let's refresh. There's no favorites anymore. And you would say, you just disabled that link, right? So there's, I don't know, some database call. We check if favorites is on, then link is off. But look here, there's also something disappeared. And if I would now go back to this favorites page, there's nothing, right? Nothing is here. It's just empty, like the page 4 or any not found page would be in this example page here. So really, I just disabled all the things that belong to that one domain, the favorites domain here. And if I would re-enable it, right, then it would just appear again. And how it works is really that we deliver all these assets that come here together. And then this microphone is saying, hey, I got something to contribute to the menu. So it just shows up there. And it also says, hey, I got something to contribute when there's a preview shown of a movie. So I'll end up here. And that's the beauty now, because if that favorite is not shipped, since it's just, it registering itself, if it doesn't register, it's consistently removed or consistently added. And that's great because I didn't need to write a single line of code now respecting those feature flags or, taking into consideration, if that isn't there, then in that area, don't show that. I didn't need to write anything. It was just microphone delivered or not. That's all. And it just works.
Here, and of course, a complex site like Netflix is a good example here, which I appreciate you actually cloned it. Hopefully, it's available for our viewers to also go and play around with. But like all these features, as you will, the way you disable and enable these features, it's already been deployed, and then someone can enable and disable it from your application perspective or the deployment perspective or something. Just maybe explain to me that concept, because it's deployed, right? It's not like you're redeploying.
Exactly. So that's already deployed. So there's a thing here, this backend that we call a feed service. You might want to use one. We got one for free here, at least up to some usage, right? But you can actually create your own feed service or get, let's say, a licensed one. We also offer a licensed version of that. And this is, let's say, the heart of your micro frontend solution, because you deploy to this thing. This thing keeps track of what you deployed, what versions are there, right? So you could see, okay, so we got the favorites in version 102, but let's see, are there other versions? Yes, it was deployed a couple of times, and actually there's already a 103, but we rolled back, right? So the currently active one is the 102 here, which is great because that means you can also on individual features make rollbacks. If you see that's not working out, you just roll something back, for instance. But that's why having such a feed service is great. It doesn't only, let's say, take care of that independent teams can publish. They only need a valid key, etc. So you could just create one also for CI/CD pipelines, etc. But really, it also makes sense in that sense that it allows you to have this orchestration very dynamically, right? I mean, I now make the real hard trigger. I turn something on or off globally, but usually there's a very, let's say, sensible trigger in there, and you can have feature flags also for these microfrontends where I say, oh, if the user has this and that right, then ship this microfrontend for that user. Or if you say, oh, if the user is coming with Chrome, don't ship that microfrontend. You can do all these things because, yeah, it's a service and it can dynamically react to your requests, which is quite great because now you can really compose your application on the fly for different users, just having different things coming together. So think about, beta users or something like that. It's very easy with a system like that. A new feature is just flagged, only available for certain beta users. So it will only be provisioned for these users. Or, maybe a consent dialog where I say in the EU, it needs to be that consent dialog, but maybe in the rest of the world, no consent dialog or a different one. You can easily do that with a system like that, right? Again, there's usually much complexity in a monolithic application to achieve that. You would have your code everywhere poisoned with all these feature flags, and no one would try to touch these because you don't know is it still actively used or whatever. But here it's very obvious, and even, let's say, a product owner could operate that. So usually this, let's say, admin view here, this portal is only seen by really an admin, not an end user, of course. But yeah, that's the heart of the whole solution. But then really what is, let's say, acted upon from the end user, that's your real application. It just consumes this micro frontends. You can see that in the network tab when the page loads. So let's just do that. Let me just refresh that. And you see it does a couple of things, loads some styling in general, etc. But then it gets these Netflix demo requests here, and that goes, I hope you can see that, to this feed service, right? And the response is actually now the collection of all the microfrontends to be used. And disabling now one of them, like the favorites, will result in the next run to skip these microfrontends. So for instance, now skipping the random Pilet here, let's just remove it. And you see this is gone, and the feed Piral is here without the random microfrontend. And same principle as before, and right? So everything regarding this functionality here was really in one microfrontend. So disabling it has a consistent impact on the application. It's guaranteed to be consistent because everything that's part of it comes with the microfrontend. So if it's not coming, then consistently removed.
I like the way that actually, you have this guard mode from your control plane where your admin, so to speak, can turn off and on features across the board for certain users or certain personas. But then also programmatically, as I understand, from a request perspective, if Joe Soap or someone logs in and he's not supposed to see favorites because of he's under 18 or whatever, then they can actually kick in that flag to be hidden, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the greatest advantages. So you can create a system where you just throw in all the functionality that you want, even admin functionality. I mean, the backend should guard anyway, right? But then for the front end, I mean, you synchronize now the provisioning of these micro frontends with the rights that you have as set by the backend. So if the backend says, oh, for this micro frontend, you would need the, I don't know, right access right, but you don't have that, then it's not being provisioned. And so you can really have that in sync, and there no more that someone forgets in the front end to have a guard here and suddenly there's a button showing up. So you click it and then there's this strange message, something went wrong, and you think, what did go wrong? but you're a developer, so you look in the network tab and you see, oh, it's getting a back of 403 or something like that. So the API is saying that shouldn't be there, and they don't handling that properly. They just have the generic error handler on this in the front end. I mean, to me, that's happening quite a lot in many web applications these days. And I don't want to blame now some developers, because error handling is hard and you don't know what the API can throw. But this way, you're guaranteed to only show in the UI what the user can or should actually access. And that's quite good, because I, as a developer, I don't need to, let's say, take care of every little button and then I lose the overview. But really, I just put together what belongs together from the same domain, same write set, etc. Put in a micro frontend and it gets provisioned or not. And I don't care anymore. I just say, oh, it needs these backend APIs and it syncs automatically, for instance. So it's quite convenient. Just needs to be set up once and runs reliably then, which is always good.
And these micro front ends, it's not just the UI, right? It's the end-to-end actual connecting to the microservice as well.
So of course, yes, it contains UI elements, but these are already domain specific, so they will not be just a button. But if it's, for instance, I mean, these are also just, let's say, buttons here. I mean, these are links, but still. But it's not about their styling, right? It's really about what do they connect to. In this case, favorites connects to, the domain information that there's a /favorites page. And so it has, of course, some element, but that already has some information on it. In this case, it's, where should this favorites page be? And of course, the favorites page, and that's again where we come to the consistency story, that's also in the same microfrontend. So they, of course, know the URL. And then, of course, it's also just a UI component at the end of the day, this favorites page. But like the others, it's not a UI component you would throw in somewhere else, but it's rather a domain-specific component. And it might contain, as you said, already all the API calls and everything to get now the information that you want to see there aggregated, right? In this case, it's quite simple because, again, we don't have any user accounts behind, so everything is just in local storage. I go there, and it's the favorite stored to that user profile. But in general, yes, there could be API requests and everything. So the whole story is contained in these components that are stored in the micro frontends. And that's also, well, it's a very common question. Aren't they the same as a UI library? No, a UI library is really just, it says what is a button. But a micro frontend, it might just be a button, but it already comes with all the domain knowledge. So it has already proper wording on it, already real behavior. Does it open a dialog? What does it do, this button, etc., etc. So it's really, it might leverage some UI component library, but it's much more than that. It really has the domain knowledge.
Cool. And it's like each feature is owned by, one or more features is typically owned by a team, right? And then they can decide what tech to use it in. The backend might be Go or something, and the front end might be React, versus the favorites page might be totally done on Blazor, for instance.
Yes, so one of the advantages of micro frontends is likewise with microservices that you're quite free in your choice of technology. But I mean, the same constraints apply. So for instance, if you are, let's say, C# only, I don't know, shop, and someone might say, I want to try Go today, so let's use Go for our new service. Yes, I mean, you can do that, but should you do that? Because no one else can now do maintenance, etc., for that service. And then the front end, it's even more severe, but because besides the problem, of course, of knowledge sharing, who else can deal with that technology, you also, of course, have overhead with each technology. So let's say you're using React you have 10 microfrontends, for 9 you're using React. It's good. You can share the React runtime and everything. It's very efficient. All fine, but then one team decides to choose Angular. I mean, yes, it works or should work. It can work. Let's phrase it like that. But the question is, so what does this team bring to the table to justify the additional weight of full framework that's also then running? And Angular is not lightweight. That's why I choose Angular here. If, of course, we would now talk 10 microfrontends, 9 would be Angular. And the 10th would maybe be Svelte, which pretty much is a very, very thin layer. It's a very thin framework. Yeah, we could then come back to the maintenance problem. But again, so on the front end, you really still need to consider, let's say, white in terms of, what's the package size, and therefore evaluation time, bandwidth consumption, etc. That needs to be considered when you bring in other frameworks. But you can do that. And Blazor is also certainly the more heavyweight category.
Okay.
But one thing maybe to add here, sorry, that might be also an advantage. Let's say, bring up the example of the 10 microfrontends again. If now this 10th microfrontend is only visible, let's say, in a very deep subpage, let's say you have your shop that I just described beforehand, and then for some products there might be a very elaborate 3D viewer, right? And this 3D viewer, there was a great library, let's say, for Blazor now to write that. And so the team decided we use Blazor for that. That might be also a really cool case for microfrontend, because it is not directly loaded, it's lazy loaded. This 3D viewer is so deep down the page that, it's not impacting any direct loading time. It's really just, when you go deeper and deeper, and then there's this thing. And the 3D loader potentially loads a lot of assets. So the loading of Blazor is really, you can pretty much discard it with respect to what the other assets are. So then it would be a really great case. But you always, of course, there is no silver bullet here. You always need to weigh the pros and cons, but you can do everything with other technologies too.
I was about to say that it enables teams to work separately, and as microservice and stuff like that should be separate, and all. It kind of defines clearly the separation. But at the end of the day, it's just one Netflix still. It's still one product, right? And if it has, like you mentioned, 9 micro front ends, and one is maybe causing some performance impact on the browser, it's a bad experience. So from a QA perspective, that's bad. So someone needs to talk. The team should be talking to each other at some point, right? And that's not the problem Piral is trying to solve. But it's cool that that we know that you can use you're flexible to use any tech you want. Can we quickly talk about if a feature, or you call it pillets in your documentation. Mm-hmm. If one of those fail to load, does it break the whole thing, or just maybe talk to me through the kind of life cycle of a pillet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these pilets, they're our terminology for microfrontend. So if you say microfrontend is the generic term, then Pilet is the term of denoting a microfrontend in a Piral instance. So that's an application running Piral. So they are always guarded, meaning that there is a setup function. So you couldn't imagine a Pilet is more like a library. So it follows pretty closely a plugin pattern, right? And in order for these Pilets to self-register, of course, we need to have, let's say, a point that we can call, right? And this point we call setup. So every Pilet needs to export a setup function. That's the only requirement. The other thing is, of course, that the format needs to be readable. So it needs to be, for instance, a system.js module. We can have a look there in a second, but usually you don't need to know these details, because you're using just the build tooling that's there, and then it just does it. And if you don't use it, we have a specification. So then you will naturally learn, let's say, what is required to publish a valid Pilet. Okay, so having said that, so you have the setup function, and that is called then when a Pilet successfully was evaluated. So we got a valid URL, we integrate that, we try to load it. If it fails, we discard it. We're showing, of course, an error message in the console. But if that succeeds, then we try to call the setup function. If it's not there, again, error shown, nothing will be loaded. That setup function now receives a special object, like we call it an API object. You can call it also the app object, that has an interface called the Pilet API. So that means it's an object that was really done for each Pilet, so you can't influence other Pilets with that. And it has all the functions for now registering elements on a page, right? So you can say, I register full page or register part of a page, and you're free to go. Now, these things should all work, but if you do some boo-boo here and this thing just fails in the setup, then it just fails, and your application still continues to run. There is no problem with that. Likewise, of course, you might now register a component, like for instance for showing a page, And if that component, for instance, fails, when now, the page should be shown, we call, component, please show the page. That might fail, right? But then again, only the parts will be, let's say, failing where this thing should be shown. And there's a fallback that you can, on your application, register what then to do, what to show. You might show nothing. You might show, oh, that didn't work. You might have your own logic in there, like, I don't know, redirect somewhere or do something. So that's then up for the user of Piral to actually define what should be the behavior if something fails. But what is guaranteed is that if something fails, it doesn't crash the whole application. So everyone can just live the life happily, every team. And if of course a team screws up, then it's bad, but it's not bad for other teams of the application.
And is there any concept of dependencies between these micro front ends, or is that kind of a big no-no?
So the whole system was designed to be, let's say, loosely coupled and to be flat. Therefore, you cannot have, let's say, one microphone depending directly on another. So you can't have a hierarchy, and that's good, because if you could have this, and there are other systems on the market that do that, but I mean, then you need to take care of, for instance, recursion. What if you have A depends on B and B depends on A? That's very easy case, of course, but usually it's quite deep down the rabbit hole, right? And not so easy to see. And you need to capture such cases. And second, of course, not only is this bad, but that has now an unknown depth in the loading time. Instead of saying we just load and we are done, oh, you load, you keep on loading, but you need still something, and you just have a cascade, and you don't know how long that will be. And debugging that is very, very tricky, and resolving that is even trickier, because suddenly you need, again, to talk to all the teams. And the final part is, of course, if you have such a dependency and you open a tree instead of making it really flat, is that turning something off is really like terribly difficult. As you have seen, I could just turn off favorites. Now, if favorites wouldn't be, let's say, directly under the root, but maybe directly under browse, you might still say, you could still disable it. But what if there's another thing that now depends on favorites? Should we also load that? Shouldn't we load that? What is... Suddenly you have, again, things that are very, very strange to debug, where you say, oh, wow, this thing isn't showing up. Why isn't it showing up? Why isn't it loading? And 2 days later, someone says, it wasn't loading because someone disabled this other thing that's completely unrelated. You're like, huh? I mean, it's just a waste of time. That's why, I mean, there are a lot of lessons learned in the last, let's say, 15 years of doing distributed applications, especially on the backend side. And one of these things was keep things flat, because they make things just much easier to trace, much easier to debug, much easier to comprehend. But what you can, of course, have is, first of all, mechanism of exchanging things. They're always loosely coupled, like events, for instance, right? So events are quite simple. Someone emits, someone captures the event, someone listens for it. If no one emits something, I mean, there's no problem. Of course, maybe your logic depended on that someone emits, but I mean, there shouldn't, I mean, by design, nothing will break if now no one emits. And likewise, if no one listens, I mean, you don't rely on that. So yeah.
So it comes with also with like an eventing system, in a sense, where, let's say, one feature and other feature kind of depend on each other, in the sense of talking to each other, because
Yes.
cross component communication will always be there. Like
Yes.
adding something to the cart, and a cart is a different team, for instance.
Yep.
That's an event, right? And it's completely loosely coupled, in a sense.
Yes, you can do that with events. We also have a shared state that you can use. And the third one, that's actually the thing that should be used the most, are so-called extension components. You can think about these like events, but in the UI. Mm-hmm. So you can register something that renders only when someone, let's say, opens a slot, which is like emitting an event. And quite often this is what you want to use, actually, because let's go back to this card example. Yes, when someone adds something to the card, I want to be notified. But why do I want to be notified? Usually you want to be notified because you show something, right? You show that icon or so. You don't own now this button that, something is added to the card, but you show maybe the card or how many things are in there. But what if someone else just owns a slot there and says, oh, I by the way, I know how many things are there because I'm from the same domain as where the button lives, right? And if someone wants to show something, then just tell me. So someone could just say, hey, I know something to show. And then you just always show. And the good thing is, you don't need your own, let's say, state container for that, where you say, oh, I received this event now, put in my own bag. And I need to watch out because they now introduced a new event when they remove something. And I need also to have this in order to always stay in sync. And now you have this problem that you opened a side bag, right, where you need to stay in sync. But what if you could just say, hey, someone just tell me what the current state is and I render there. And that's extension components. So someone else can still be owner of that state, but you just do something with it. That's quite cool because it's again loosely coupled. If there is no one, let's say, saying, hey, I got this state, then you don't show up. And if you don't say, I have something to do with this state, then you are not rendered and it's good, right? It's the same thing as events, but for UI.
Great. How about I throw in a demo event in there and you can maybe show us a bit how one can build something like this in Piral.
Awesome. Let's go ahead. All right. So I think Netflix we fully covered. Let me just close that.
I will also have the link to everything down below into the show notes. And while you're getting ready, I'm just going to also ask the guys here to subscribe to my feed. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Hit the bell. Do the like thing. Comment something nicely for Florian. He will appreciate it. Back to the show. Sorry, I had to do that.
Oh, cool. So let me first scaffold now a new Pilet using standard command line tooling that you might have seen if you used, let's say, the state-of-the-art front-end tooling. I use here the npm tool, which is the package manager client that's by default bundled with Node.js, or let's say coming in the default installation. And it has a cool command called init. So you can pretty much start a new project. I here give it the name of, let's say, a template. It's called Pilet. So it will look for a special package. And now for this kind of, let's say, initialization here, we got some additional command line arguments. Since it's a new Pilet, I need to tell it, for debugging purposes, I want to see it already in some application running, right? So I can tell it a source to use. That's a source application. I use here one that we already published called sample Piral. And I can also give it, for instance, what bundler to use. So bundler is a technology that is just like a builder for web assets. And you can use things like Webpack or Parcel if you know these. I always use ESBuild because it's very, very fast to install and very fast to build. So hopefully I specified everything correctly. And if that works, let's see. Installing dependencies is always good. In the meantime, let me show you how this sample application looks in one of our demo pages. So it doesn't have that spectacular design, but it gives us now an app shell. And app shell is this application that's just empty, but waiting for microfrontends to enter. So this is how this thing looks like. Here, there are already some microfrontends in there. You see them already appearing on a common dashboard with a tile. So here's, for instance, Mario 5. But this microfrontend registered also a little bit more. It also registered a menu link. You see here Mario 5. And it registered a page. So if I click on Mario 5, I get to a page, and now I can play this. Everything that I show today is, of course, available on GitHub. So nothing here is a secret. This microfrontend isn't a secret. The app shell behind isn't a secret. Nothing here is a secret. Okay, I can also go back. Let's see. Pilet scaffolded successfully. That's always a good message to have, right? That's great. Let's open the code editor and see what's in there. Excuse my slow machine, but the build process and everything should still work. So what it did for us is it created a package JSON. That's what npm init does. It also added a few things to this package JSON. By default, and we didn't change that, it's using TypeScript. You could also just use standard JavaScript, but yeah, default is TypeScript, so it's good. So we get a tsconfig, and we have one file that's our root module, so the thing that's seen first. And it has the setup function already that I said beforehand. Now this is already, let's say, set up, pun intended, with a few things that you might want to use or not use. At least for us, we can now see how this thing behaves. But before I go into, let's say, all the details here, let's just start this locally. So let me run npm start here, which just runs Pilet debug, and as you've seen, that was just really, really fast. That was now bundling our Pilet. I mean, it's a really small one. Microfrontends are supposed to be small, so that's always good. And I can now go to localhost 1234, and we see welcome to the Piral sample app. And that looks quite similar to this one here, but as you can see, there is no other microfrontends here. It's a little bit similar, this thing that I just started. This is an emulator that we are using here for your application. It looks pretty much the same as the full application here, except of course that there are by default no other microfrontends loaded. And that's the same thing as, for instance, if you think about an iOS or Android emulator, right? So on your phone, of course, all your applications are installed and you have a full system already with applications. But then if you, let's say, want to develop, you'll always start in a fresh emulator with nothing installed except maybe some core applications like a store or something. That can be helpful, of course, to sideload more applications to see maybe interaction with them. And you can do the same here. So it's pretty much the same principle. We get an emulator. Now we can develop our application using that emulator. It already gives you a view how this thing would look later. And then you can either be happy with that, or you say, oh, now I want to see how it looks if I sideload more things. But one thing after the other, let's maybe look first what we got. We got a menu item called documentation. Okay, great. When we got this tile here, welcome to Piral. And I think we also got a notification in the beginning. Let's see, let me reload that. Here in the bottom corner, we see hello from Piral. And to showcase that, let's change the tile maybe. Let's make it 2x2, and you can see that the tile now increased in size. And you can even make this dialog down here maybe appear a little bit longer, and we can also make hello funny. And yeah, now this thing should show up a little bit longer, right? So we can define how this thing works. But let's say we don't want this notification to show up, we just remove it. Or likewise, if we want to change something here, we can also change it. So for instance, if we don't want to have this link that now goes to the outside, opens a new page, but rather, stays within a single page application, you might just use the React router link component, because that's what you already know from if you ever used React. Then with the React router, that's just your go-to component. So I could just say, hey, let's make a page here. Maybe, I don't know, call it docs. Don't have an agenda here, so we'll just add now a sample page. So I can do that. And now, of course, when I go to the menu and click it, oh, I am at docs, so that's good. But of course, there's no page found here for it because I didn't register anything, right? So I can just do that, and now you will see what's behind this interface, this Pilet API. You've got all these different functionalities. They're all coming now from this one application shell, from this Piral instance, as we call it, that you're now using as your emulator. Your Pilet can also work against different kind of applications. I mean, it's not strongly coupled to that application, but at least, let's say, from a typing or development perspective, it makes sense that you have this one target in mind. And if you have more targets, then yeah, we also help you and have some tooling. But that's, I think, going a little bit too far right now. So what we can do here in order to register page is just say register page. I need to give it first the path. So it's slash docs. And then I can write a little bit of React to have that page there. So I can maybe have a little bit of hello world and a lorem here. Make a little bit of lorem and format this nicely. Let's just save it. And here's our page. So now at slash docs, our page appears, right? I'm at home. I go to documentation and it's all looking good. So far, everything is awesome.
They say everything is awesome source. Now, this is this demo specifically. It's very simple, and I like the way you can just get going with a kind of simple npm command. Just initialize your feature, start working on it. But who is responsible for the layout? Because I see a specific layout, a shell, like you call it. Can we maybe just back up like a few years and go into that? Because does a team
Yes, so I didn't go into, let's say, developing the app shell on purpose. First of all, the app shell is usually done by a different team, and the app shell is usually only developed once. Yeah, sure, there's also some maintenance on that, and someone needs to bug fix and maybe update things once in a while. But honestly, the majority of the work on any, let's say, meaningful microfrontend solution is spent on the microfrontends. So what, let's say, the standard developer will do is write a Pilet. Sure, we can also scaffold using also npm init, a new shell, etc. Do all that. But for now, I think what we need to keep in the back of our heads is this layout as it is there with, I don't know, a header, footer, navigation. That's all defined by the application shell. It doesn't have to be. You can distribute it too. But usually it makes most sense to be in the application shell's responsibility because, I mean, these are, let's say, application concerns. A microfrontend shouldn't be concerned about how the navigation looks like, just how the content gets into the navigation, for instance, right?
I was also about to say, going back to the whole dependency graph thing, like the n number of dependencies you can have, you get lost in these dependencies. If teams find themselves having component A is depending on component B and component B is depending on component A as two different teams, I think there's a deeper problem, right? Then maybe the domains should be from that perspective be combined in a sense.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so this was TypeScript. It's great. And also, I'm just looking at the time. Do you have something in Blazor, my favorite framework?
Sure. So let's go ahead now. Let's remember what we did here. And I mean, it was very simple because we didn't even use lazy loading for the content, etc. We just said, okay, let's just develop that. And now we can apply the same thing also, for instance, for taking the sample application shell and do it with a different technology. So let me just back up here. And let's call this here Blazor Pilet, my Blazor Pilet. And for this, I will now use instead .NET CLI, right? It, I think, has a nice command, .NET new. And it has all these templates that you can install. And what I did, I already installed a template for Piral Blazor. I called Piral Blazor Pilet, or Blazelet maybe, if you want to call it.
Blazor is better because if you say Blazor Pilot, it might be a pilot version of Blazor.
Anyway, so we call it Blazor Pilet, this template, right? And what you can do is .NET new and then Blazor Pilet, I think. Right. And now it already tells you I'm missing now the mandatory option. Beforehand, we called it source, right? And now we're calling it Piral instance. There are also more, let's say, non-mandatory options. I think you can also choose a bundler here, etc. But let's not do that. Let's just say, let's use the same source, our sample Piral here. And we're good. I think we should now have a directory. That's great. And it has a little bit of code. So let's just run dotnet build. Let's hope that it all works. So what it does is it starts, of course, the standard build process that you know. And then it detects that there's also a little bit more required here. So this thing also, I mean, at the end of the day, that isn't, we need a whole chunk of JavaScript code here too. We need to have that emulator for the sample Piral here running, etc. So what we do is we scaffold a Pilet, but we do that for you. You don't need to do that, right? It's also scaffolded in one of the, let's say, special directories. Let's see that in a second. First, let's open up this thing to have a look what we just scaffolded. So this looks completely different to beforehand in that sense that, yeah, it's now a CAS approach, right? So we have our C# project. It installed the Piral Blazor tools, which is the secret source for making all that scaffolding, etc. possible. And it installed the Piral Blazor utils, which is, let's say, a shared package from Blazor that makes it possible to, let's say, use some primitives, for instance, for these extension components that I talked about earlier. Also, you see already some of the options like the Piral instance we selected at our scaffolding, and the npm registry is set to the default registry. But you can set, if you have a private registry where your emulator, for instance, is placed, you can enter it here. All right. Otherwise, you got an imports file. You know that from Blazor. You don't have a program CS. You have a module CS, and that has, for instance, a main. Like a program says, but it should be empty because you're not the main now. That's the application shell. And you can have something like configure services for dependency injection. So that's already placed for you. And in this sample, we already placed a example counter here. So that counter is written using Blazor. So far, so good. So that's really, let's say, just some simple example. Now, what I can run here is from this special folder. And in the future, we will have that also tightly integrated into the, let's say, Visual Studio way of running things. But right now, you just need to trigger it from this folder. Here you make just a script that starts this. I can now start here the Pilet debug on now this generated sidecar, right? So this will essentially, in the first run here, install a little bit, and did that. So most of the output was on the installation, and then it puts everything together. And now the outcome is, let me refresh that. Our sample app, we didn't register now, a tile. We didn't register, at least yet, a menu item. But what we have is a new page. So let me just go there, counter. And here's our counter from Blazor showing up right at this page. At this point in time, of course, the behavior is still a little bit strange because, yeah, sure, I have the single page experience here, but without having a link in there, I mean, as you've seen, it reloaded the application, but you can just integrate a link. We could now do that. And otherwise it works as beforehand, right? And Blazor only loads lazily when it is demanded. So when you would first enter this page, it loads. Now it's of course loaded, and it always then works when someone goes on that page.
Fantastic. This has been awesome content, awesome demos. Thank you ever so much, Florian. We will get the content or the link to the repos, the link to your demos down below in the show notes. And I want to really kind of take my hat off to you. Well, my speakers are in the way for kind of joining me again today. And like I said again, subscribe to the YouTube feed, friends, and let's wave goodbye to our friends, Florian. Until next time, folks, and enjoy your day. Thanks, Florian. Thanks again.
Thanks.